We've got some fantastic panels here with some amazing creatives, and it's my joy to welcome these two onto stage, which you are going to spend the time in the presence of Ewing and Kieron Gillen.
And mask off. Hello, everyone. I'm going to take my jacket off because I've realised it's going to be hot. There we go. Okay, conceptually, what we want to do is, me and Al have been working at Marvel I did my first work for Marvel in 2008, so like 13 years. I was described in an interview last week as a veteran, and that was a really scary moment because it was me realising, oh my God, that's true. Al, when was your first work?
I want to say 2012.
2012.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, so almost a decade.
Yeah, nearly a decade now.
So we know a lot, and we're kind of into the concept of like, who are you? Because like what we want to talk about is kind of going to twist enormously depending upon who is in the audience and what's actually interesting to them. Can we have the lights down? Because I need to see the audience for this bit. Okay. Well, I'm going to go to the side so I can see you. I'm a genius. That's better. Okay, like, I immediately just want to become the Beastie Boys with me and Al, and just like start busting some rhymes. No, let's not yet. Let's build towards that one. Okay, like, why are you here? And that's basically the first one. Is like, put your hands up if you're somebody who doesn't really read comics, but actually, here's the way. Are you just into the Marvel characters? Actually, here's another way I could put it. How many people here who have no idea who me and Al are? Thank you. Honesty is important, thank you. That's good. So actually, most of people actually roughly know who we are then. Okay. Well, that seems... but at the same time...
Yeah, we can...
Sorry, Al?
If I say too much, we're going to get some kind of feedback here. So I'm going to go back to the middle.
Okay. And how many people would describe themselves as regular Marvel Comics readers? As in, read a comic about like once a month. So about a third of you. Okay. So we're somewhere between those two poles. Okay, let's go in. Al, what was the moment? Because I remember my first moment of utter fanboy delight. Like when I got paid to write the word schnicked. I was just sort of sitting there writing Wolverine, and that was in my like the second comic I ever did for Marvel, and it was just writing SNIKT exclamation mark, and we're like, oh my, I've just earned money by doing that. I mean, like, what was your sort of fan moment coming in?
I mean, very, very early on, I got to. Oh no, there are two of them. Very early on, I got to write Monica Rambeau, and my first introduction to Marvel was the UK Secret Wars reprints, and if you're of a certain age, as I am, you'll remember those. That was the first Secret Wars, which was basically all of the heroes fought so that they could sell some toys. And they reprinted this in UK newsagents with sort of backups that included like Alpha Flight and a very trippy Iceman miniseries, which we should all have been paying more attention to at the time because it's when they basically told us he was super gay. But that early thing, Monica Rambeau, at the time Captain Marvel, was, had the best powers. She could turn into any form of light or energy. And I kind of continued reading on with her in Avengers, in the monthly series, which was Roger Stern at the time. Roger Stern and I want to say Tom Palmer. But, there we go. But, yeah, and that, again, Roger Stern wrote Monica incredibly well, and that sort of made me a fan of the character for life. So to have the opportunity to sort of put her into a comic, that was probably quite a big fanboy moment for me. Yeah, because I've never been that much of a fan. As in, I like the Marvel characters more than I like the DC characters. I'm a fan of the Marvel heroes. I'm a fan of the Marvel universe. I don't have that burning desire to like write Spider-Man or my life has been a failure. I don't have one of those. Not even Doctor Strange, and I have crossed that one off now, so that's fine. But yeah, I don't really have that. Is that something you have?
Oh no. I mean, like, it's more for me. It's the opposite in that when I do it, it's a weird. Oh, I had no idea I would enjoy doing that. You know what I mean? I mean, people. The most common question people ask you as a comic writer early on is, "What superhero would you like to write for Marvel or DC?" And that's same as Al. That's not something I ever thought about. And the reason I didn't think about it was because it's not in my control. Marvel and DC own those characters, so it's basically me like fancying people's partner. As in, I'm not going out with them. I don't get to have designs in them like that. So I made a joke answer. I always said Dazzler, which I did end up writing Dazzler very early on in my career. But that's for me. I don't think about a character which I don't own until someone asks me to. Like, my job is literally like, I don't know, CB gets on the phone, CB Cebulski, the editor-in-chief of Marvel, and goes, have you got any ideas for the Eternals? Something like that. And then I go, and disappear for like a couple of weeks and have a think. And then I really wrestle with the concept. I've realised something that might be useful, considering like quite a lot of people don't know who we are, would be talk about what characters we've written and what books we've done.
Yes.
Because we'll definitely be asking questions later. So if anyone's got an idea for a question, like we'll come back and we'll try to answer them as best as we can. Al,
sounds good.
What books have you written?
Well, I started off with a Mighty Avengers book, which, I mean, I guess the first thing I did was some sort of tie-ins and one-shots to kind of prove to the Marvel editors I could write. But my first series, I think, was Mighty Avengers, and that came out very much, that was basically like Luke Cage, Monica Rambeau, as I said, the Blue Marvel, who's a sort of Superman-like character who'd recently come into existence, the second Power Man, White Tiger, a whole bunch of various Avenger-related characters. And I mean, I guess the idea was that they were supposed to be a sort of street-level team, but I ended up taking them into some big cosmic places quite quickly, so that fell by the wayside. And then there was Loki, Agent of Asgard, which I took over from Kieron, kind of, and we'll probably talk about that. But that was about a year and a half of, the Loki, and it was just after, I think it was just after the Avengers movie came out, so, he was quite a sort of hot property, and, he was kind of, he was around, he was sort of, they were wanting to, I think one of the pieces of the brief was that he should have a sword. He should have his own sword. So we included that. But yeah, that lasted up to the new Secret Wars, which was when Jonathan Hickman switched the Marvel universe off and switched it on again, kind of rebooting, like a hard reset.
I do like the idea if Jonathan Hickman actually did it. The character Jonathan Hickman entered the story like Grant Morrison and just rebooted the Marvel universe.
That would have been great. Yeah. That would have been really good. But after that, I entered quite a busy period. I feel like I'm forgetting stuff. But after that, I did enter quite a busy period. Because I had Ultimates, which was named after the old Mark Millar, Brian Hitch series, but involved a lot of the characters from Mighty Avengers and a couple of Ms. America from Young Avengers. And basically, they were just doing like huge cosmic stuff. I was really getting into some massive like, and this is the thing where I say I have no desire to sort of write individual Marvel characters, but that sort of falls by the wayside when you talk about one aspect of Marvel from the 70s, which is the idea that all of these concepts are these huge, giant-sized humanoid beings that hang around and gab at each other, essentially. And that's catnip to me. I love that. So, I was always trying to write stories like that, which, generally don't go over well, so these series kept getting cancelled. But at the same time, I was doing like New Avengers, which was sort of continuing a bunch of the other characters from Mighty Avengers and doing a sort of Avengers side team that was mostly like young people. as a kind of, it started off as a kind of international rescue type situation, but I think it just fell in, as these things do, it fell into its own plot lines and sort of became more of a soap opera. And that morphed into US Avengers, which was incredibly poorly timed. But that started off as like, I wanted to tell some jokes, some funny jokes about, the US and then Brexit happened, and I was like, okay, well, I should do something more serious about like patriotism and what that means, and then Trump happened, and it was like, let's just try not to crash this into a mountain, and it just became, how I attempted to deal with that, and like by issue 4, I was telling jokes, but the first 3 issues were just, if you go back and read those, they're like some kind of attempt to crawl out of a hole, like a mental hole. And that culminated in a crossover series, because I was technically one of the people writing an Avengers book, and all of the Avengers books were going to come to an end to make way for Jason Aaron's New Avengers, which it's not called New Avengers, it's just called Avengers, but it was new. And that was great. That's full of epic stuff. But we needed to sort of finish with a big bang of a story to kind of, not to sort of, kill off all our heroes or anything, but to kind of give them a last hurrah. At which point, the idea was that they'd need a bit of a rest. They'd need to go on a bit of a vacation, and there'd be room for a new Avengers team. And as part of that, Bruce Banner had died. And as part of that, we decided, well, let's resurrect the Hulk. So we did, and then I wrote a horror book for 3 years called Immortal Hulk, which is a whole thing. And then now I'm doing Defenders, which is another favorite. I love the Defenders. That's another one where if you had to say, like, pick one team to write, then it probably wouldn't be Avengers, it'd be the Defenders. And I get to do that with Javier Rodriguez. He's a good artist friend of mine. So that's nice. And then I'm doing Venom. I'm jumping onto Venom in October with another friend of mine, Ram V, who is working mostly for DC, I think, in his own stuff. But this will be like a big break out at Marvel for him.
Ram's writing Swamp Thing at the moment.
Yeah,
and his own indie books. He's just finished The Many Lives of Layla Starr. Is that right? And that's amazing. Really try that if anyone wants to grab it.
That's a whole thing. And yeah, that's where I'm at the moment. That brings us to present. I don't think there were like little things, small mini-series, little bits and pieces. Oh God, Empire. I totally forgot about Empire.
Al's forgot about the big event he wrote.
That was good too. I won an award for that one.
An event, for those who don't know, is basically the big blockbuster comic of the year. As in, it's kind of like a huge thing. It's normally the idea.
That was, I'll tell you how that came to be. That was originally like an Avengers Fantastic Four crossover, and then it got bigger. And part of what I did was put Hulkling into it, because I'm a big fan, and Hulkling is a young Avenger, so we tie back into...
Foreshadowing.
And yeah, that ended up, I think that sort of dropped right after comic shops came back into being, because they took comic distribution took a break in 2020 because of the pandemic. And Empire was kind of, and we were all like worried about like, oh my God, what if nobody's buying comics anymore? But it turned out that what people wanted was a very LGBT-friendly space politics without that much Fantastic Four in it in the end. So sorry, the thing got a lot to do. I enjoy writing the thing. The others not so much, unfortunately. But I blame myself.
Question, actually. This is certainly, I was thinking about my answer to this. What's the biggest character you haven't written? Because I was thinking I've written almost everyone at Marvel, at least for a panel. Who haven't you written?
I mean, if we're talking at least for a panel, I've done a lot of them. I mean, Thor's quite a big one that I haven't had an extended go on. Although I've written Loki, so I've written a load of Thor. I can't think of anybody. I feel like even Doctor Strange, which was the biggie, the one I was missing. Now that I'm writing Defenders, I'm writing like a lot of Doctor Strange.
Mine are. I don't think I've written Daredevil for a panel.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I've done Daredevil and Deadpool. I've made jokes about both of them in other books, but like I've never actually written either. They're my probably two biggest.
I have never written Daredevil. I do have my Daredevil idea, which I don't know if I should say out loud.
Definitely don't say it.
On a public station.
No, don't say it, because I guarantee I would want you to write it, so don't say it.
Okay, well I'll save it. I do have like a Daredevil idea, or the start of it. I don't think I've got like a long Daredevil run in me, but I feel like I've got like a year of Daredevil that would act as a freshening of the breath before somebody more important takes on the character like him. Yeah, no, I don't really want to write more than a year of Daredevil, but I've got a year-long Daredevil story in me. So maybe one day I'll get to tell it, I don't know.
Yeah. It's funny, like I kind of think about this as Daredevil should be the perfect character for me to write, because, you know, I was raised Catholic, and Daredevil's Catholic. In other words, I've got guilt and shame and all that kind of stuff there. And I really like legal dramas. I love the concept of, like, what does law mean anyway? But I can't really imagine what any street-level hero I have trouble thinking about. The idea of, like, what does a Daredevil... I'm not Ed Brubaker. You know, I've never been in trouble. That's a lie. I was a murder suspect once. But there's a story. But...
I'm curious.
Yeah. But yeah, I have one high concept for a Daredevil story, I think. But we'll see. Oh, my stuff. Like, what I've mainly done is my background, I was in indie comics. I did a book called Phonogram. Like, I used to be a games critic, but then I wrote about video games for money. And then I became a comic writer. So I'm not allowed to speak to, like, several of my wife's friends' kids, because they may give them bad ideas that is a career path. That you can go, oh yeah, I played video games all day until I got bored, and then I did comics instead. So that's not fair, and I feel very lucky. Okay, I did indie comics, a comic called Phonogram, which is about really snobby people who like music. And they're all awful, and people liked it. It reviewed very well, but it doesn't really say you're the person to write the X-Men. I ended up getting one job at Marvel, which is a book called New Universal, which was like a one-off special. And it's basically like a James Ellroy 1950s take on the Marvel Universe. And I killed Tony Stark on page 3. Tony got killed in this alternate universe. And people at Marvel suddenly was like, oh no, this person can actually write superhero comics and not about Britpop records. And I did books mainly in the Thor office. I can't pronounce Thor. My THs are very weak. So I did Beatrice Bill, and then I did Ares, and then I basically took over Thor. And then that led to a book called Journey to Mystery. Journey to Mystery was basically about Loki. Jamie McKelvey, when he redesigned Loki for a book called Siege Loki, that's the first time Loki's ever been hot. So, like, I think we foreshadowed Hiddleston. That's my that's the moderate claim to fame there. That led to a book called Young Avengers, which is a reboot of a comic that was very popular in the noughties, and this is a majority queer super team. That was reviewed very well, and that was the end of that thread. And the other thread is Dazzler, Sabretooth, a book called Sword. I got it cancelled in 5 issues, which is like space mutants. Then I took over the Uncanny X-Men itself. So I was writing all the major X-Men for like about 3 years. And then I stopped. Those 2 threads ended because I had sort of burnt out on the Marvel Universe. There's a few other books in the mix. And I went and did my own creator own work again for a book called Wicked Divine and various other things. And I also did a bunch of Star Wars books. Like I launched Darth Vader, which did very well, I think. And people seemed to like it, which was nice. So I stayed in doing Star Wars for like 3 years. I invented a character called Dr. Aphra, who is, thank you, who is like rogue archaeologist. as in Indiana Jones, but bad, would be a good way of putting it. And then I stopped doing stuff. When I came back to Marvel, I did some Warhammer comics for them, and I'm about a year into writing The Eternals, which is obviously the forthcoming Marvel movie, and it's a big, this melodramatic reimagination of what the Eternals are, which people mostly seem to like, which is nice. And I'm doing something else, but we can't talk about it yet. But that's broadly what we've done.
Yeah, I didn't realise I was allowed to talk about stuff before Marvel. I should mention that I did spend 10 years working at the UK sci-fi comic, which still exists today, 2000 AD. And I ended up writing a lot of stuff like Judge Dredd and a couple of sort of homegrown series for them. That is actually something a lot of British writers have in common, but you don't, Kieron.
Yeah.
You came up entirely through the indies, as you said.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's the classic... the classic way people do it is, like, you submit 5-page stories to 2000 AD called Future Shocks, and then you get a strip up there, they get them published, then you get an ongoing, and then you use that as a calling card to the American industry. That's how, like, Morrison got in, that's how...
It's essentially how I got in.
Yeah.
I mean...
What was the book that attracted Marvel to you? It was Zombo,
I think it was
wasn't
Zombo. That was me and Henry Flint doing what began as quite a sort of straight-ahead horror premise. And then it increasingly fell into this sort of very absurdist strain of humour, which we kind of, the sort of overlap point between our sense of humour, which is this sort of very sort of quite violent, very absurd, very sort of lots of stupid situations played very straight. Lots of just ridiculous side characters. Dumb, taking the mickey out of various things of greater substance, like the Beatles, or I think Almost Swamp Thing at one point. We kind of, fellow 2000 AD stories. I feel like we had a strong go at Pat Mills in book 3 with the second person captions. But yeah, that, I think it got the attention of, I think, Lauren Sankovic, and that was what got me those tie-ins, because there was a thing coming out at the time called Age of Ultron, which was Brian Michael Bendis writing Ultron taking over the world. Ultron, of course, being the mad robot from Avengers 2, which I think was coming out at that time. So it was very much...
Synergy.
It was relevant. And yeah, I wrote a couple of things, and I had a lot of fun with them because I thought these are the only Marvel comics I'm ever going to write. And then they were like, oh, these were quite well written, do you want to write more? And very similar to 2000 AD, I start getting bigger and bigger projects, and, here I sit.
I mean, like, I think if I had to sum up what does it actually say in the program that this panel actually happens? But I think part of it is like how it works, how you might want to get in, how you actually do it. And like, I think the one takeaway message I think me and Al would both say, and Al will contradict me if I'm wrong, is that we got into Marvel by doing our own stuff. It's not like we went to Marvel with the desire to like write the characters we have written. We basically did our own like work and like stuff we were really proud of and stuff that was unique to us, and that is the calling card. In the same way, sorry.
No, I was going to agree. But I was also going to say, like, you don't even have to... I mean, I got work from 2000 AD, but before I was getting any kind of regular work, I was making comics a lot. I was doing these things with, Biro and A4 and taking that down to the copy shop and sort of doing all of this stuff. And it's like, I feel like if you want to make comics, then the best way to do that and get paid for it is to make comics, and kind of, it's not a guarantee, it's far from a guarantee, but it's at least, if you go that route, you will have made a comic.
And it's something that and if you don't enjoy making comics, why do you want to get into the form, you know what I mean? As in, you've got to actually, by doing the stuff just for yourself or these very small audiences, it's about your love of the form. Like me and Al, like, the first time I think the first memory of me meeting you, Al, was like some con in 2004, and I think you just handed me Ultimate Future Shock, which was like, Al, give you an example. This is the kind of example of the sort of small press stuff we were doing back then.
Shamefully stolen from Tom the Dancing Bug. But no, this was a result of me and my brother getting very drunk in a pub in my my hometown of nowhere. No, I'm from down south. I'm from oh god, no, it's probably not very down south from here. I'm from Leatherhead. Nothing to do in a town like Leatherhead is the name of a song. The only song about my home, and there was nothing. But there are a lot of comics to read, and you know, when we were both of drinking age, we got together and we started riffing on like what the ultimate future shock would be, and it would be like a twist in every panel. And a few years later, I took this away with me, and what I was doing at the time, because I should give you some background on like the form that this took as well, was I'd take a sheet of A4, I'd fold it again, fold it another couple of times, and what you get then is a little 32-page booklet. And I would take this to the pub, often, you know, just, I drank a lot when I was still single. I would take this to the pub, sometimes with friends, sometimes on my own, and I would doodle away at it, which is basically, I'd sort of fill in all the squares. I'd unfold it, I'd fill in all of the squares, you know, each page, and each page was just like one panel. And I could write very small, and you know, my cartooning is basic, but it's certainly good enough to get across what is happening. And you know, I'd keep refolding it to check that I had it all the right way up. And then once I was done, I'd take that to a copy shop, do like, you know, 50 or 100 copies. Then the business of folding every one of those copies as the original had been folded, stapling the middle, and then cutting the edges with a bread knife. So my comics always had these little fuzzy edges. And the Ultimate Future Shock was one of those, in that every single panel was a new twist. And I forget how it went, but like there was a load of them that was like, oh, this entire situation, I'm observing it on a microscope slide. And then the next page was, my God, through this microscope, I can see a tiny scientist looking through a microscope. What was the other one?
I did like, actually, Rick and Morty stretched that joke to an entire episode, and you threw it away in 3 panels.
It was 2 panels. But I mean, I think my favorite joke out of that was, one of the things was like, by shooting through this time viewer, it's like I'm shooting people through this time viewer, I can change history. You fool, that's not a time viewer, that's a window. And you've just shot JFK.
Actually, one of my first ever comics did involve a JFK story, and it's like that was literally, I should have been shot for that by a time traveller to prevent it happening. It's like, if your time travel story involves JFK, you've gone wrong, almost certainly. That's my basic writing tip.
Yeah, it's, you know, JFK is done. But yeah, that was it. That was for years. I mean, how many years was I coming to conventions with like at least one of those little things?
Yeah, it was, honestly, it's like, I mean, I came to comics late because I read comics as a kid. Like when I was like I'm trying to think when I stopped comics, probably about 12 or 13, because where I came from, I'm from Stafford. Stafford didn't have a comic shop, so there was very limited access. I only started even reading comics even casually when my brother started buying 2000 AD.
Same here.
Yeah, and so I actually came to comics as an adult when I was 25. Like I read Watchmen when I was 21 and read like 1 or 2 books a year, and then I came in hard at 25, and I went to my first con like within 3 to 6 months after getting into comics, and I wrote my first script when I came home that night, and then I got someone to draw it by a series of methods which I won't recommend. Actually, honestly, it was advertising it and being nice and trying to project professionalism, which was a lie. And then the next year, I'd actually talked to a variety of people into doing a bunch of these, and there was a black and white photocopied zine which I sold for like a couple of quid, and that was my first sort of calling cards. And this is I forgot where this is coming from. Oh yeah, that's where me and Al met.
Yeah.
And like, I think the first extended conversation we ever had was just after you got into 2000 AD, and like it was a con like this, and we were in the hotel bar on the last day, at the end of the day. So we're just, you're not rewinding. You can't do that. It's time travel. We're unwinding and just sort of talking about where we saw ourselves in the industry at the time.
Yeah, and I was very depressed.
Yes.
How much has changed?
Yeah.
No, yeah, I think at the time I thought 2000 AD didn't have much life in it, and comics, newsagent comics sold in newsagents, comics sold through, because I feel like at the time 2000 AD was having a hard time in comic shops.
Yeah. This is actually something that's worth adding. In 2003, comics were dead. You know what I mean? Like in the UK, there was one con in Bristol, which is about the size. This was and smaller than this con we're at now. There was one British Comic Con. There was a couple of really small like ones which were basically the size of a pub, like Caption. But like we got into it not thinking there was any future. And then of course now there's cons like if this was a normal time, there was a con every weekend across the UK.
Oh yeah.
It's so different now, and it's
No, I was agreeing.
Yeah, and it's like having come across comics in this period, which of course is partially because of the medium has done amazing things, partially because of like the manga boom happened as well, and obviously like the MCU, that was such a huge change, exposing these. I mean, I remember being in a pub circa 2000 with my editors on magazines, and one of our running jokes was like that people arguing who would win a fight between Black Panther and Daredevil, and the joke being no one knows who Black Panther and Daredevil are. And the concept was silly to even think about.
I mean...
and now, you know what I mean? Like, this is a very interesting future we found.
I remember going to see Iron Man, and it was like, they made an Iron Man movie. Holy, we have to see this. It's going to be like a train wreck. No, it was like, they made an Iron Man movie? Wow. It's like the idea of that was just... I mean, Iron Man was not now... this is what everybody says about Iron Man, but now everybody loves Iron Man because everybody loves Robert Downey Jr. He's a very lovable fellow. At the time, Iron Man was kind of coming off like a string of quite unlikable moments. He'd sort of created some sort of superhero registration act where all the superheroes had to like give him their papers and, sign in his forms. So he was like the face of bureaucracy in the Marvel Universe, which is like as unhip as you can get. But we watched this thing, and Robert Downey Jr. was great. Jeff Bridges was in it. I'm a huge fan of Jeff Bridges. It was fun. It was a really fun kind of 3.5 star movie. I had a good time. I ate a lot of popcorn. And then at the end, Samuel L. Jackson comes in out of nowhere and says, "Hey, you're going to join the Avengers?" And it's like, that blew my mind. That was the moment. Before then, it had just been, oh man, they made an Iron Man film and it's fun. I mean, that's the other thing. We were walking in expecting like The Dark Knight Returns. We were expecting it to be like, rain and darkness and why is my heart made of iron?
Can't do the rain because he would rust. That's the thing. It needs to be more sunny and galvanized.
Oh man, sodium man. But like, yeah, we were and it was fun, but it was bringing the continuity into it. Because this was the thing comics did, which films could not, we thought, I kind of said this again when like Infinity War and Endgame came out, because I remember walking out of Infinity War and going, oh, they did a crossover. They did an event. I didn't think they could do that.
Yeah. This is the thing, like, I don't know if you've been on, I've been on the radio, like... did I actually say this on Radio 4? I forget. I occasionally get invited on like stuff to pontificate about superheroes or whatever. And they're brought in with the idea being there's something special about superheroes that appeal to the world. And that's true. There's obviously a wonderful genre with fascinating characters. But the specific technology is the fungibility of narrative. That's why it's not, if it was like if Marvel had made not Detective Comics. If Marvel had made, I don't know, comics about dinosaurs, and made a universe of dinosaur comics, and that's somehow all connected, and that technology would be fungible. That's what they brought to movies, and that's why Marvel now owns the earth. And it's fascinating. You know what I mean? Like an idea that simple, whose time had come, has changed the shape of pop culture in the 21st century. I mean, like a few years ago, I was one of my standard arguments in 2003, because I came from a generation that sort of believed that the problem with comic shops was that it too heavily stressed superhero comics. Like, comics is a medium. The idea that going to a comic shop where you have this dominated by one genre is a bit weird. You know what I mean? Imagine going to a bookshop that just sold fantasy novels. You know, like there's many other sorts of books. So our kind of thing was let's do more different kinds of books and try to change the shape of the medium. And I sort of, because that's what the real mainstream is. Real mainstream is like detective fiction or spy fiction, or you know what I mean? That was such an unexamined rant of mine that I'd had for years. And about 4 years ago, someone at a panel said, well, that's not true anymore, is it? You know, because mainstream stuff is superhero stuff. And I was like, nope, you're entirely right. That argument's changed entirely. I think the details of that argument has changed, as I still think it's a bit weird that any one genre takes over a shop or a cinemaplex. But it's still definitely untrue now.
Yeah, I also feel like certainly in the mainstream, I guess the Marvel and DC of it all. Once you kind of step outside that, it's more like sort of science fiction, more fantasy, more kind of real world detective kind of stuff. I think what Marvel and DC have, which is interesting, is that they've sort of, at this point, it's very rare that you get a superhero comic about going on patrol.
Yeah.
It's always like something else with this patina over it. Or like, a sort of kind of the connectiveness of the continuity in like the worst scenario. So it's like a comic about a comic. But, I mean, Iron Man, to go back to Iron Man the film, you know, he doesn't, because before that you'd had like, I think Daredevil, which was monstrously bad, just appallingly terrible. It was because they tried to squeeze everything into it. They tried to squeeze like the entire history of Daredevil, like his every memorable moment was in that movie. To the extent that like the first 15 minutes of it were like this extended monologue about like who I am and how I came to be. And he was sort of going out on patrol and doing all this stuff. Iron Man is like, the structure of that movie is, you know, the man first. And yeah, he gets hit with shrapnel. He's got to build the suit to save his life, all of this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes back and his boss is like, this is great weapons. And he's like, I don't want to do weapons anymore. And, you know, I can describe that like a science fiction movie. At no point does he go on patrol. At no point does he like, I will become an iron. You know, there's never that moment. So superheroes, it's the genre that's taken over the world, but also it's almost the sort of
It's a chimera genre. That's the thing about superheroes.
Yeah.
It's not really one genre. It's bits of horror stuck together with bits of sci-fi, with bits of crime fiction. And that makes it really flexible. You can plug anything to a superhero story. And like, actually, I thought this was worth segueing back from wider scale to sort of tighter scale.
Oh, yeah.
When you took over Immortal Hulk, I mean, if you look at the history of the Hulk, Hulk's been lots of things, and he's been some genre, you know, different genres at different times. And of course, Al, do you want to talk about what you did when you took over Hulk? And like when you looked at all that and how you built Immortal Hulk, really?
It's a story I've told a few times, but basically it's, I went back to the very start because there's a thing I do, and I do this with a lot of superheroes, in that I'll sort of go back to a very early or very memorable appearance, and I'll take a look at it, and I'll try and sort of find out, ideally like issue 1, back in the 60s, before anybody knew what it was. And certainly with the Hulk, that's very true, because he spent his first 6 issues ping-ponging between one status quo and another, and then got cancelled. And like, it's only because he was like a memorable villain in other books that he ever came back. But the very first issue of Hulk in 1962, I think, it's 2. It's a horror story. It's a sort of atomic Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing, and the most memorable scene is Bruce Banner sitting, staring into the middle distance, waiting for night to fall, and knowing that he's going to become something horrible. And not just something horrible, but the opposite of his personality, this monstrous creature of strength and rage and power, and, you know, that, like, doesn't particularly that wars against all mankind. So I just went back there and mixed that in with a bit of the TV show, the Lonely Man concept, where Bruce Banner is wandering from town to town and he can never kind of, have any friends. But there's so much standing on the shoulders of giants in that one from me. It's just like this enormous amount of what has come before. I guess the other big influence was Grant Morrison's Batman.
I was about to say, I must have realised that subconsciously, because I was just thinking you were doing, all the eras of Hulk are in Immortal Hulk, in the same way when Grant was over at DC, that was their idea of their, Batman run. It was
the big thing Grant Morrison did with Batman, for those not in the know, was, and at DC, where they reboot everything, they wipe out their continuity and start it again every few years. This was huge, but to treat every single Batman story that had ever taken place as having happened. Because Batman is a very changeable character. In the 40s, he's this sort of, I guess, the weird figure of the night, this sort of pulp character, very heavily indebted to the Shadow and the Spider and the pulp heroes of that vein. Very quickly, when war hits, he becomes a vehicle to sell war bonds. So he becomes much smilier, his chin becomes more pronounced. He's, the friend of children everywhere, he's the friend of the police everywhere, he's kind of doing charity balls. By the 50s, this isn't enough, so he's... I'm talking about Batman a lot here, a character I've never written. In the 50s, he's constantly fighting Martians, Venusians, aliens, any kind of weird science gimmick, and so on and so on. And then, in the 60s, you have the Batman TV show, so it's all Pow, Zoom, William Dozier. In the 70s, they're reacting against that, so suddenly he's the weird figure of the night again, and on and on and on. And all of these changes were in the life of one man. And in about a 15-year stretch, and to take it back to Marvel, I consider Marvel Time is a thing where, in order to make it so that the entire history of Marvel Comics from 1961 onwards could have happened to people who are still young enough to throw a punch. It's happened in a period of years, and my personal number is 15. It's happened in 15 years. And the further back you go, if you have a case to say, last year this happened, it probably is what happened in the comics last year. The further back you go, the more compressed things get. But essentially, Grant Morrison's big innovation was to apply Marvel Time to Batman and say, all of this has happened. And I ended up doing something very similar with the Hulk, which is what does it look like when someone has lived through all this and we don't forget any of it? And it's kind of... But the thing is, because of how Marvel's structured, that's sort of how you have to approach any Marvel character, because nothing is thrown away. When Iron Man got big in the movies, I think it was Matt Fraction who was writing him, or came onto the book.
It was Fraction, yeah.
He had to contend with the fact that Iron Man had basically been an evil bureaucrat up until, now. So he had to put Iron Man through some period of kind of atonement that also harked back to previous appearances. So there's a lot of that. I mean, I feel like that's the thing with Marvel that makes them very Moorish, is that you pick up a comic, and that comic is always sort of telling you, ideally it's telling you there's more out there. There's a whole world out there for you. We're just hinting at it. Not ideally, it's telling you, you have to read this first. This comic that you don't have. You have to read this before you can understand this one. And that's what you want to avoid. But you do want to hint at that larger world, that big universe.
There's a quote, when I was writing Star Wars, the critic Tegan O'Neill, she did a series of really good pieces about Star Wars. And one of her arguments was basically that, as in the central joy of those first Star Wars movies was that you walk into the cantina and everyone in the cantina has a story. We may not know it, but look at that guy with those weird eyes. He's got a lot going on. And and the thing about writing Star Wars, what I tried to do, kind of in following Tegan's insight, was that anytime I explained something, I added something. You know, like, oh yeah, okay, I'll tell you about that guy, but you should see his weird mate, you know? And the Marvel Universe is a bit like that. Like, this makes, when I was writing, when I am still writing Eternals, one of the things is the Eternals are quite unusual for Marvel. And they're invented by Jack Kirby in the 70s. And the idea is basically, it's like Chariots of the Gods, if people know that idea from then. The idea that the gods were actually just aliens we didn't really realise were aliens. That's kind of the idea. And he does this series of 17 issues and then gets cancelled. Now, and then the thing about that is, it was never part of the Marvel Universe. It was just its own thing. There was a bit he fought the Hulk, but it was a robot Hulk that someone did inspired by a TV show.
Built by college students.
Built by college. That's my favourite thing about Marvel.
Jack Kirby's faith in in college students, in the young people generally, is a huge inspiration for me. He was constantly writing comics about how young people were capable of anything.
Making killer robots, mainly.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the thing is, since it's been folded into the Marvel Universe, there's a problem with that. You know, the problem is, generations of writers have tried to fix that problem, as in they've got ideas and they've done their own editions and it's been added to stuff, and all of which has worked really well, or all of which works well for the situation they were writing. But for when I come onto Eternals, I just sort of saw the fundamental problems, like what I felt and what I felt other people were wrestling with, and tried to solve them. And this is kind of the other side of like work for hire, as in when you're hired by Marvel, you're being hired to apply your best brain to solve problems, to make their characters more interesting and more useful and hopefully more popular. And with Eternals, it was the idea that, yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about Eternals is they're mistaken for gods. And then, but if you put them in a universe where there's actual gods, the Eternals are less interesting. You know, a guy who was once mistook for Hercules is less interesting than Hercules, you know? So like a lot of my thing, I end up turning them into angels. The idea that, you know, if you actually read the Eternals, and once again, this is kind of like what Al was saying, as in if you go back and look at Kirby, it's like, wait, you got the Celestials, no, they're gods. They make the Eternals, and the Eternals fight these things called deviants. And the deviants are kind of like demons. And if you think about that, what the Eternals, oh no, they are that. Then all my choices become about making them more like that. And then that allows them to find their own niche in the Marvel Universe. And that's kind of like what I think the job I was being hired to do. At least I hope it was, otherwise I'm in trouble.
I mean, it's good. It's a good comics.
Thank you.
It's good comics. That's the only job at the end of the day.
I remember my point, sorry. So I was doing that, but at least the other point was, with all this continuity, and it's all over the place, and it's not like, and it's bitty. Because it's not because the Eternals have only been published sporadically. So it's not like, you know, Spider-Man, who comes out more than once a month. It's this, okay, we had a run here, and then 10 years later we had another run, and then we had a few issues mentioning them in the Avengers. You know what I mean? And this history, it's continuity, but it doesn't feel like one cloth. And my aim was trying to turn like this continuity into mythology. And the idea, like, let's pretend all this was planned and actually work out ways to make it bigger. But most importantly, make it bigger, so much bigger, that it goes off the side of the scale. So in other words, people who read the Eternals, you read the comic and hopefully there's enough small, tiny nods about their culture that you realise, wait, Kieron's got all this worked out. And he's never going to tell you about it. It's like the full-on J.R. Tolkien. As in, yeah, I've got my appendixes. You don't need to know about that. If we need it, we'll get back to it. And the idea that you can have this world and make it so much bigger, that's kind of what, that's me trying to basically turn them into Marvel characters, if you know what I mean.
To take it off Marvel for a second, I do a comic on the side called little side work. No, it's called We Only Find Them When They're Dead, and it's kind of indebted to Kirby because it's all about space gods, but also, and you know, why not? Let's do the plug thing. I'm selling it. I've got about
really good buy.
I've got about 3 copies left. But the thing that I do, because I planned it out as 3 books of 5 issues, and then that's it. You know, after 15 issues, I'm done with it. And, you know, I'll have built a nice world that maybe I can come back to in 10 years. But, you know, I'm only interested in telling the one story for now. But that one story is 3 stories, because between every book, there's a gap of about 50 years. It's the sort of Canticle for Leibowitz, the gods themselves kind of structure. But as part of planning out every book, I write a timeline of what has happened in the years since. In the books, I'll refer to maybe a third of it. and like there'll be some maybe an oblique reference. And yeah, it's that idea. It's the idea of suggesting, of having built this stuff, mostly so you can suggest it. Now, I think the difference with Marvel is that it's all built. I mean, it's hard to find. A lot of you talk about doing research into all the old Eternals. I'd imagine there's at least a few of those books that are just impossible to find.
They're really tricky. I mean, it's okay to do because the Eternals have less. You can actually read the core Eternal books in an afternoon. You know what I mean? So it's not like researching Hulk or Iron Man. And in some ways, that was the bonus for me.
I never did read through the entirety of the Hulk. There's a gap in the 70s that, I know nothing about. So, sorry if I...
Immortal Hulk sequel.
No. Never again.
I was going to say, I see where basically, I figure I'm going to start saying, has anyone got any questions around past? So, prepare thinking about that in approximately... I appreciate your efforts and joining in on this endeavour together. So we've got about 10 minutes of us talking. Yeah. Is there anything particularly that you think we're talking very, very broadly here?
I mean, we are talking...
Here's an idea. Tell me how you write comics. When basically I'm CB, I phone you and say, hey Al, I want you to do a comic. What happens?
Well, first there's a period of thought where I sit and think about it. And, this is when I'm sort of doing the washing up, taking showers, all of the business of being a human. That's all thinking time. Go down to occasionally when I do the washing up, I will put on a podcast so I don't have to think about comics while I'm doing that. So I can have because it's like I feel like any kind of task that is not writing that's in your day, it's still writing time because your brain is going. So, but there's generally something that often they'll have something in the brief. With Loki, it was give him a sword. There's been other things I'm trying to think of one now, but Deadpool was originally, I did a Deadpool thing called You Are Deadpool, which I've long since sold out of any copies I own of, but if you can pick it up, I'm still quite proud of it. It's a playable choose your own adventure game with Deadpool in it. It's really difficult. It's incredibly difficult. You will have to cheat. But the thing for that was we need a 5-issue Deadpool thing split between 2 artists ideally. Could you, maybe involving some sort of time travel element. And I kind of came back with You Are Deadpool, and they were like, oh, yeah, brilliant, a game book. That sounds fun. So there's always sort of taking some element of the brief, which is usually a very vague, generic thing, something that they're thinking, which I feel like you can ignore. And then but it's a start. It's something you can percolate around. I mean, are you talking about how do I actually write a script?
No, that was an open question. I think this is actually. I think that's something I want to answer then, because we can definitely talk about script stuff as well. But people, when they ask me about Marvel, they say, how much do they tell you what to do? You know what I mean? And that's especially doing Star Wars. It's did they tell you to write this story? And it's
no.
Yeah.
No, I mean...
It's interesting because it's both the yes and no of it. As in, no, they don't, because this is actually the thing.
Yeah.
They want you to give you the best ideas. They want literally to siphon your best ideas out so they can turn them into movies in a few years' time. That's literally the business model. And I'm all pro it. That's you know what it is.
Yeah.
So they want you to swing big. So I always remember, obviously there's things which are harder and stuff, but I always remember my first comic. Because you get this idea of what working with an editor is like. But I remember the first comic, that Universal 959, and it's written, it's drawn, everything's fine. And the editor says, I was looking at this thinking, I think you should move this splash page earlier in the issue, and that'll be really cool, it's a big image, we should do that. And I immediately feel my brain freeze up, because I'm like, oh no, this is it. This is when I get completely, my story's now ruined by a meddling editor. All those kind of bad ideas you hear about what happens. And then I sort of take a breath and say, actually, yes, that's a really cool visual idea. However, it breaks the story structure, as in we have got to introduce these ideas in this order or it won't be emotionally meaningful. There's a second pause as the editor thinks about it, and he goes, actually, yeah, you're right, and we move on. And that was a huge sort of breath for me, and oh no, they trust me, I'm being hired because I'm competent. You know, they want me to do the job as well as I can. And, you know, and...
I mean, I've had moments like that. I used to work with Tom Brevoort a lot, and I think the last thing I did with him was Empire. But certainly early on, and sort of less as time went on, but early on he'd have a lot of notes. I say a lot, it wasn't that many, not really. But I mean, he'd have, and they'd generally be good, but it was always, I'd go away and think about it for 10 minutes. And either I'd come back with, okay, here's how I think we can do that. Or I'd come back with, I don't think that's going to work, and here's why. And he would always accept and acknowledge the argument. I don't think there was ever a time where he fired back with like, I see what you're saying, but, and you know, continue the ping pong match. I feel like generally if I could come up with a good reason why it had to be the way it was, and this is true of I think all the editors I've worked with since, it's like, if you know, they might have a thing, but it's always in the spirit of, hey, let me bounce this off you. And the idea is that either you go, ooh, I hadn't thought of that, which is, you know, I guess the ideal scenario for them. Or you go, oh, having thought of that, I don't think so, and this is why. And then, yeah, fine, that's great. So there's no kind of like, oh, you must do this. I mean, occasionally.
There's always it's a big old machine. I literally had an idea I've never thought about before. Because obviously I've told that story and it's like, they're hiring you because they trust your opinion. But I've just realised the flip of that. And it's like, how do you know they trust their opinion? Sorry, how do you know that they trust your opinion? Because they carry on hiring you. And if they don't, that's them very clearly saying, we just trust your taste.
Yeah.
You know? And that's depressing to think about.
I mean, I was always aware. I was always very aware, and I still am, that like, as Take That memorably sang, there's a road going down on the other side of this hill. And that like, no, I know that my time at Marvel is limited. It's like, at some point, it may be tomorrow, it may be 10 years from now, you know, maybe I'll become a cyborg and it'll be 100 years from now. But like, at some point, Marvel will stop wanting what I give them. So I better not be too married to Marvel.
I think you
can my heart.
Yeah. You can only ever be yourself, really. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you're being hired for your perspective on the world and what you see and what makes you you. This is what I always sort of say. We go back to right to the beginning. Like, if you're breaking in by doing your own work, people say, "What story should I do?" And some people kind of go, "Oh, I want to do the. I know this is a popular genre which sells, and like I'll do my version of it." I mean, I think every writer in the world has got a supernatural SAS pitch. I mean, I've got one. You know what I mean? But that's kind of that. But that's not the real thing. What you should do is the thing that only you could do, or at least that few people other than you could do. Because that's the biggest, purest burst of how you think. And that's what interests people. Because we come to writing for these unique perspectives and I'm not self-aggrandizing here, but like we come to writing to feel, you know, and see, and that's why people should hire you over someone else, because the way you think is useful. And if the way you think isn't useful, you can't change that. And so it's pointless being hired. I mean, I've literally gone down a logic hole here. I'm not sure where I ended up.
I feel like it's almost Calvinist. It's a little bit, you know, only certain people will enter the kingdom of Marvel.
I don't mean that I don't mean in a bad way. I mean that as a kind of like, I mean that in the awful capitalistic way, in that kind of, this is a system.
Here's the thing to, I think, bear in mind, and it's a hard thing to accept, but Marvel needs people more than people need Marvel. So, you know, if you go in bearing that in mind, I think. But of course, you know, most people go in going like, oh, wow, it's Marvel. You know, certainly I was doing this, like, it's Marvel. Wow, they're so big. Oh, wow, they're going to give me some work. That's good. I could use that. I need to pay the rent. And it's like, it takes a while before you're kind of like, no, actually, they're hiring me because on some level they need me. And, you know, even if you don't have, you know, even if starting out you don't have that much power, you know, you've got like a little bit. I don't know. This is turning into like unionizing talk.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem. Me and Al being left-leaning people are kind of always trouble if you give us microphones.
I mean, we're very happy. We're very happy at Marvel. Very happy.
I tweeted this on Friday, but like someone's asking advice on pitches. And one of the bits of advice I gave is don't call them pitches, call them proposals. Because pitch
Yep.
implies you are on your knees. Whereas proposal implies, hi, we're two equals and I've got an idea. Are you into it?
Oh, God, I always call them pitches. I'm going to start calling them proposals from now
Yes.
on. I mean,
Call them orders.
yeah, diktats.
Yes, diktat.
I mean, I don't know, I don't want to kind of sit here and be, I think it's a two-way relationship. And I do think it's worth bearing that in mind. I feel like it's important not to kind of subsume who you are into what you think this large corporation will want. And, for all the reasons Kieron said, it's a hiding to nothing. And, it won't, I don't know if it'll make you happy in the end. Because eventually, it doesn't matter how much you like writing Spider-Man, or writing The Thing or Thor, one day it'll be your last issue.
It's better. I left Marvel because I was burning out, and it's like not just even Marvel firing you. You might realise, wait a sec, I'm not enjoying this as much anymore. I should get out, And that's also like you will change. If you think the idea of you wanting Marvel forever may not happen just because you are not that person anymore.
I mean, I feel like I'm I feel like with Defenders, I'm kind of coming to the end of a large story that I have been telling. And it's I've kind of mapped out. And I'm at the point where it's like, what do I do for Marvel next? And it's like, that's maybe the point where, this is a hell of a way to quit. No.
I'm out, mic drop.
Yeah. But it is that thing where you think, okay, well, I've built something. Do I want to keep adding to it forever, or do I sort of tie it off and look for something new in this arena, in this sort of? Because here's the thing. Here's why Marvel is. I've talked about Marvel need you more than you need them, which, if nobody, corporations need people, but I feel like why I personally enjoy working at Marvel, a large part of it is that universe of creations. And it's not so much that it's a nostalgia thing, like I grew up reading these characters, but it's that it's so fascinating to kind of go down the different paths of this maze and see what's there and I'm still, even today, I mean, just yesterday, I can't talk about it because it's a massive spoiler, but I put a thing from the past of a character I'm writing together with, oh no, wait, this ties in really strongly with this other thing. And making connections like that in this enormous tapestry of stories, it's still really gratifying. It's really enjoyable. So I like the problem solving of it, the kind of, the taking pieces and wiring them together and building something new out of them. That's still really, really satisfying. And I think as long as that's true, I'll always want to work at Marvel.
It's definitely the problem solving is it for me. You know what I mean? As in, that's the big thrill for work for hire. As in, I've described the Eternals as in, here's a thing, here's a problem, what do I do? And then, there's that panel at the end of Marvel Boy of the, what's the name of the Marvel Boy villain?
Dr. Midas?
Yeah, Dr. Midas is just turns and sees this wall of mindless ones coming at him. How can I turn this to my advantage? And that for me is the absolute what's it like to work at Marvel panel. As in it's this chaotic mess and somehow we're going to make it all work. Admittedly, that was an ironic ending for him because he couldn't. But I think we can.
I mean, he did turn up again.
Yeah,
so
he must have.
He must have, somehow.
But for me, that was actually it was definitely that when I left Marvel the first time. When I was writing Star Wars comics, and I was enjoying the Star Wars comics much more than the Marvel stuff, and it was instant. The Marvel stuff I was doing was really hard work, and then the Star Wars stuff was really exciting. And for me, that was no, stop now before you go terrible. And I did. And I went and did Star Wars, and I carried on Star Wars until I was burnt out on Star Wars. Then I did something else for a while. And then it's I got to a place where I did a book called Peter Cannon for Dynamite, and that was me. Okay, are you back in superheroes? And that was me basically sort of seeing if I was in love with it again. And Peter Cannon, if you've read it, it just does kind of end on a very optimistic kind of note. And that's why I've ended up coming back and doing more work at Marvel, because I'm up for it again. My brain feels refreshed, I feel ready and fun. And,
I feel like I've got a similar structure, but more, I guess, more granular, more kind of character by character. because I'll write characters for ages, and then I'll stop and I'll have to walk away, like for various reasons, but like mostly sometimes because I feel like that character could be better served by younger writers and newer and fresher writers. Other times because I've said everything there is to say that I have to say, and sometimes because it would be, you know, if I am not the guiding force on that character, and this was true of Loki until recently. It was only recently I felt like, oh, I think I could write Loki again. But there was a period of, I felt like 6 years where it would have just broken my heart to write even a balloon, even a panel of that character. It would have just broken my heart to, because I put so much in, and it was such a massive part of me that, like, having walked away from it because I had to, because the series was over and they had plans and I wasn't part of those plans, I could never write Loki again. And it's only very recently that I've kind of come back around and gone like, okay, I'm in a place now where I can come back to him and I can write that guy again. And, you know, we'll see if I get the chance to, but I feel like I can, is the important thing.
I wrote for Loki about the same time, maybe slightly longer actually. But and he was similarly my iconic character. It was him and Namor, the two characters I think are most my inside, and they're not too comfortable characters to realise you empathise with, shall we say? I too, like Namor, have great abs, but like I could probably write a cameo of Loki now, but not much else.
I think I'd want to write, but I don't know if I could. I don't know if it's super fair, because I'd be sort of taking him back a little bit, maybe at this point. So, you know, I'd have to work out a way. But, I mean, right now, I guess the character I probably most identify with that I'm kind of still writing in some capacity is probably Nova. It's either Nova or Star-Lord. But, like, it's that. So, you know, it's not Namor. I think with Loki, we wrote different Lokis.
You know, as was planned, I think.
Yeah. Because I know.
I wrote at least 2 Lokis. You know?
Oh yeah, no, you wrote 2 of them. I wrote about 2 Lokis. Yeah. The Loki of the last 4 issues of my run was very, very different from. To the extent that I got a little bit too clever with it, and I think some readers felt a bit hurt that I basically killed off the hero. Yeah, but you know, I hadn't really. But it was a massive change, and people weren't. You know, people hadn't signed up for that particular ride. But yeah, no. It's kind of interesting that Loki is the character we both have in common.
Yeah, it's nice, and it felt very. I mean, people occasionally talk about those Journey to Mystery, going into Young Avengers, going into Agents of Asgard as a trilogy. And it's so rare. Imagine a trilogy written by 2 people, and it is pretty. It's seamless. It's different, but seamless.
2 Kierons.
Yeah, 2 Kierons, and they all honestly. Like I wrote Jim, not trying to mess over the person who followed me, but definitely causing a problem for whoever followed them, and that person was me, and I had to solve that problem badly. I liked it. Anyway, actually, before we go to questions, there's one thing I wanted to say. I said that you can't change yourself, and that's true, you can in lots of different ways. But in terms of your voice and what you want to say, something I was quite conscious about, and I'm quite interested in Al's perspective on this, is that I may not be able to change myself, but I can certainly choose which parts of myself I'm going to use in a project. Like, I deliberately, at my first time at Marvel, I kind of wrote 2 books at once. And like one of them was proving I'm not a complete weirdo, which is like Uncanny X-Men and Iron Man. And the idea that, you know, I write these indie comics which are like this, but I can do streamlined, beautiful superhero comics which speak to my interests. And the other book I did was like Young Avengers and Journey to Mystery, which was, oh, no, I am a complete weirdo. This one's for me. You know, and that kind of like, the level of self-indulgence varied. And to be honest, the reviews of the latter are better than the former. But like, that kind of like different parts for me to stress, depending what the idea or what the audience is. Like, if you put me on a certain kind of book, like, if I'm doing Shakespeare, you know, my voice would, if you're doing Shakespeare, you've still got to make it feel like Shakespeare, you know? You've got to speak to those characters you're writing. And the same way, if I was doing, like, Darth Vader, here's a good one. People said, you know, how much were you told to write Darth Vader? I was like, no, I was going to pitch a Darth Vader story because I'm writing Darth Vader. I'm writing Darth Vader in this time period. He starts here, he ends here. I want to have that emotional truth, because if I'm not writing that, what's the point? You know, like, because that's unfair to the character and the ideas. Anyway.
I feel like I had a similar thing when I started. It wasn't planned. But, you know, I was writing Mighty Avengers, which was a very straight-ahead superhero comic. And then Journey into Mystery was this sort of psychedelic exploration of a whole bunch of stuff. And, you know, but they were both very kind of seat of the pants and sort of, I didn't really have a plan or a structure. In terms of changing, I don't know, I feel like you have to kind of constantly attempt to improve as a person. You have to kind of constantly try to reach towards a higher version of yourself, and I guess that includes as a writer. So I feel like you can become a better version of yourself as a writer. You can always become a better writer. I've learned things. I've sort of, from like kind of emotional things to like simple craft stuff, and like, you know, my little internal Wally words, these are 33 tricks that always work. I feel like every writer has like a little Rolodex of like, these are, you know, stylistic tricks, traits, ticks. But in terms of, you know, what I do and what I talk about, I'm never going to be that good at the punching part. But again, you know, if you were to like say, okay, once, you know, the current creative team or the one after that is done, we would like to get your ideas on Thor. That would be very different from like, once the current creative team is done, we would like to get your ideas on Captain America. They're totally different. And, you know, you'd include your own personal stuff into it, but it's, yeah, I feel like I'm answering like 3 questions at once.
Honestly, I think everything we're talking about is complicated, because writing is basically complicated, and it's also nonsense. And those two things are at war with one another. We probably better go to some questions, but
yeah,
let's
answer some questions.
Has anyone like raised a hand? Oh, someone at the back. Actually, the person at the back, because it's hard to be at the back. Is that a raised hand, or is that a?
Hang on a second, guys. Is this on? Excellent stuff. Yes. Yeah, because we are streaming this to the, or we will be uploading this to the internet, we'd like to actually have people hear what the actual question is, instead of having to repeat it. So, where was the question? Where we were pointing?
The person in the check shirt at the back raising their hand politely.
Fair enough. In that case, somehow I am going to make my way over there. Bear with me. I am getting there.
I think.
Oh yes. Okay.
My favourite game, by the way, in these things is picking people far apart as possible to see how tired I can make the people running with the mics.
Okay, so here's a question for both of you. In a storytelling standpoint and an artistic standpoint, what's your favourite superpower?
Okay, like from a craft perspective, what's the most fun one to write? Man, this is tough. Do you want to?
I'm going to go first. I'll tell you, mine is, and I've rarely written it, is super speed. Because it's a craft, because super speed gets under my skin because it doesn't make sense. Like, it breaks any story it's in. And like, trying to work out ways that it doesn't break a story. Like, why is the speedster ever surprised? You know? So, and I've done, the few times I've written super speed, they've always been their own individual reason. And I think it's like, I'm not going to say this on a stream, but like, a lot of it is inattentiveness. And I did this issue of a comic called Uber, which is a pummeling attempt to display what super speed could be like in terms of erosion. Like how someone with super speed could kill the Superman one stroke at a time by just like eroding a mountain, you know? So there's something I find, and how do you display super speed? Do you show it's fast? Do you show it's slow? Like Makari's in Eternals, and Makari, she has super speed. So like me thinking about how we do that, that's been really interesting. But yeah, it's almost, I think that The Flash was always the most formally interesting of the classic superheroes, because you've got to do that kind of stuff to make it, because you can't show it on a page, it's about movement. Movement's impossible, so we have to be clever.
Super speed is a great one. I remember there was a bit in No Surrender where I kind of did the first page, which was Quicksilver running all over the world, and it was just like a series of snapshots of locations with stuff that was, had already happened, or. But yeah, for me, this might be a cheat, but I'm going to say magic.
That is cheating.
Yeah, it is cheating, but I feel like, magic powers are interesting because when I write, especially superhero comics, I'm very conscious of them as metaphorical things. Yeah, and magic is like the ultimate metaphorical superpower in that it's sort of, it's kind of like, okay, one example, I had, in an issue of Valkyrie, I had Doctor Strange entering the realm of death by taking a sort of a mundane object, a motivational poster showing like a dark forest, and kind of just, casting a spell, which is like, a bit of doggerel verse. And then the thing sort of slowly grows to encompass the wall, and then just become the wall, and then just become it's suddenly all around them. And Doctor Strange's thing was, death is all around us at all times. And that's an example of like a magic spell that we kind of becomes, with magic you have a massive free reign to get poetic, to get metaphorical, to use the poetry of comics, which I like a lot. I always feel like the best people who come into comics from other disciplines, who don't sort of learn, I feel like the most successful are always poets. I feel like people who do a lot of poetry always make great comic writers. I could name some examples to back that up, but it's like, because it's all about the metaphor and the rhythm and the structure. So yeah, that would be mine.
Chrissy Williams, who my editor and wife, and she's amazing. She actually did a book with Tom Hummerstone called Poetry Comics, which is explicitly about poetry and comics and how they're similar and ways to actually work with them together. And that's available to buy in PDF if anyone's interested. It's just like he's right. There's poetry is very, very similar to comics in lots of ways, which is really, and it's a way of thinking and it's a way of compressing information in a very small space. There's a lot. Next question. The person with a hand up there.
Yeah, young lad right in the front.
What's your favourite superhero to write about? For both of you.
Favourite superhero to write?
Okay.
Write about. Okay. That's a different question with one word at the end.
To write about. I always enjoy, I like writing about the Defenders. I do enjoy writing about the Hulk. I spent a lot of time looking at the history of the character, so I've got a lot to say about that, about his iterations through the years. In terms of, I've got a lot of thoughts on Spider-Man. Every so often I'll fall into a conversation with somebody about Spider-Man. He feels more local than any of the other Marvel
Have
heroes.
you written Spider-Man?
Never.
That's the biggest name for you then.
Yeah, God, you're right, it is.
You were Kieron Spider-Man.
Oh, no. He was on the Mighty Avengers.
Yes.
I did write Spider-Man. I wrote both Peter Parker Spider-Man and Doc Ock pretending to be Peter Parker Spider-Man. But yeah, with Spider-Man, he's like the quintessential New Yorker, I think. So that'd probably be the start of my take on him.
Writing about, because I'm an ex-critic, so I can't shut up about anything. Like, if you ask me an opinion about something, I'll try to put together some sensible words. Like, someone like Thanos, talking about, I view Thanos as Lord Byron, as in a kind of like genocidal Lord Byron. He's the opposite of Darkseid. He is poetry, whilst Darkseid is math, and all that kind of stuff. That's the thing I like throwing out. I guess it's probably Loki. I've spilled a lot of stuff over Loki over the years. So, name was someone I've written about, but enjoy writing, but there's less to say about him. I guess kind of the X-Men broadly, The X-Men are kind of like there's a lot of things inside, and the interesting thing about the X-Men is they are a team. What is the X-Men is so flexible, and it's about these individuals with this gift, and what their individual relation to the world, their individual relation to their gift, their individual relation to everyone else. I mean, if you had to like, Emma Frost is probably the character. After you've gone down from Namor and going down from Namor and Loki, you've got people like Emma Frost, like she's someone I love writing, or Cersei in the Eternals. Mr. Sinister, like Mr. Sinister is also someone else I have a bit too much fun with. It's good though.
Cool. We'll go for a question down here, and then we'll go for a question at the back.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
This one here, and then we'll triangulate.
We'll go at the back, yeah. So go for it, sir.
Oh, hi. So imagine if, like, C.B. Spilsky, he rings you up, right? And he says they've been, like, listening to people on the internet or in focus groups, and they think the Marvel Universe is too New York-centric, right? And they've decided that, guys, we want to set a Marvel Universe story in Coventry, right? And like, what would you do, right? What kind of characters would you use? Like, would it be the West Midlands Avengers?
I've got one. I can't do Coventry. I've not researched Coventry. That's the problem. I tend to do research. First thing I do is go get a load of books and read about. Okay, let's discover the entire history. But if we go to Leicester down the road, like Leicester, of course, King Lear. Lear being, of course, the ancient water god and also ancient king. Like, people forget that that's the origin of Lear. So that would be the kind of Thor type figure on the team. This kind of like ancient water god who've been half forgotten.
I mean, well, I'm afraid this is my first time in Coventry. It's very nice. All I knew about Coventry before that is that sending somebody to Coventry means not talking to them. So Black Bolt would be the ideal superhero for Coventry.
Inspired.
Al, brilliant.
Excellent. So we got this gentleman at the back. He did raise his hand. Away you go.
Thank you. So this is for both of you. Has any material that you've ever written or directly contributed to made it to sort of TV or film, like directly?
We're both thanked at the back of the Loki TV show. Like, it's hard to say, like, when they adapt for the MCU, it's not rarely taken one for one. But
yeah, I feel like there's definitely stuff where I've been in the thank yous. There's stuff where I've sort of been I feel like I've been an inspiration, but it's, to say directly taken.
yeah. I mean, literally, when I was sitting there talking about all the alternate Lokis we wrote, I was a bit like, well, I can see why they were inspired to do that approach. You know what I mean? Like, and there's a lot of, in Young Avengers, there's a lot of multi-dimensional stuff. But no, I would never say stuff is lifted in that way. Or at least there's nothing I've seen that's been lifted directly. But, Kid Loki was a...
Yeah, Kid Loki was somebody you contributed to. The broken horn motif. So, some of the costuming.
That was incredibly lucky then. I decided to actually just flick through your slides, which you had provided. And as it happens, there is Loki.
There he is.
There he is.
There he is with the broken horn. Although, I noticed that in the TV show, Sylvie did wear shoes. So, yeah. No.
Sylvie looked after her comics much better.
That was the first thing. That was the first thing they did with Loki. The second I left was put shoes back on him. Yeah. It was generally agreed that this man's filthy, filthy feet can no longer be exposed.
The battle for Loki's souls.
Yeah.
Oh, Kieron. Sorry. You are the master punster, sir. I'll give you that. Can you point at somebody else who had their hand up then? Who else would you like? Was there somebody out here? Okay. I think we've got time for maybe two more. Let's see what we do.
Right. This one's also for both of you. When you mentioned that no one goes on patrols anymore, suddenly I started thinking that, well, most people also don't just go to bars in comics. And some of my favorite parts of comics would be like with the Dazzler when she's a pop star, or She-Hulk, not only being a lawyer, but also, let's say, nightlife. There's some kids in here. So would you agree that there isn't enough of Avengers going to shawarma joints? And if you do agree with that, what would be your approach to adding more of it?
Do you want to jump on this?
Yeah,
I have a lot of feelings on this one.
I think when I said like nobody goes on patrol anymore, obviously I'd completely forgotten about Spider-Man. That's like his entire thing. But he's got this weird guilt complex going on, so, you know. But I feel like in the movies he goes on patrols as well, so that puts the light to me. In terms of should the Avengers go to more... I mean, it's the X-Men, I feel like the big example of this is the X-Men softball game. The recurring, endless X-Men softball game. It never ends. They're still playing softball now. And yeah, I kind of feel like there should always be more of that, but it's also... One thing that I've become incredibly conscious of, almost like at a subconscious level that's kind of constantly in my mind whenever I write, is like 20 pages. 20 pages is the length of a Marvel comic. That is how much space we have. There's so much plot that has to move forward. And I mean, those scenes where the Avengers get trauma, or like, I feel like I'm always quite bad at those. I'm quite bad at including those. Because by definition, they don't move unless the Avengers are like taking the time to discuss some powerful emotional drama, by definition, they don't move the plot forward. But they're still incredibly valuable because they provide so much character, such a wealth of character. But like, so I guess, what I would personally do about it is do better myself in terms of budgeting time, which is space in comics, to include scenes like that, which, like Seinfeld, are just about nothing.
I found something like, this is me desperately overreaching. I don't believe this theory I've just made up. But is the increasing popularity of coffee shop AUs linked to the fact that we rarely have that type of material in comics anymore? Like, coffee shop AUs, the whole...
No,
it's basically the fanfic constructor. Basically, they just work in a coffee shop and they have coffee. They don't do anything. There's no threat. There's no drama. It's just that. You'd love them.
I'm not on the internet enough. This is...
I'll tell you later in the pub.
Oh my goodness.
I think part of it actually comes from we said superheroes are a flexible genre. In the noughties, superheroes moved from being predominantly a story of somebody with a real life and their secret identity was being a superhero. Like, that was kind of the predominant story. And in the noughties, like post-Ultimates, Brian's Avengers, it's worth noting as a side note, Brian's Avengers introducing lots of like breakfast scenes. He was absolutely doing it, but his breakfast scenes work in a different way to those scenes you mentioned. Because the dominant mode of superhero comics in that period was workplace procedurals. Like, it became less about people not in the job. So in other words, it's a bit like watching, like, I don't know, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. You know what I mean? But that's kind of what the thing is. The superhero comics became about a group of people being brought together by their work. And their main relationships are people at their work. In the same way you don't know about people who don't go to the work. And this has led to a reduction of the amount of like normal people you see. Superheroes spend a lot of time just talking to other superheroes. Like, look at the X-Line at the moment. The X-Line is literally like superhero separatism. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but that's kind of what's going on there. And at least like part of it's just a different type of story. Being a procedural isn't a problem, but it's certainly a thing. I mean, with Eternals, I had a separate... the Eternals are so distant and alien, and I wrote them to make them more alien. Like, you've immediately got a problem with grounding. You've just got these weirdly distant space gods hanging out with each other. And the thing I did was definitely always bring them back to Earth, have them interacting with normal humans. And there's whole scenes with having breakfast with humans and being confused by it, or characters having arguments over whether the Silver Surfer's useless or not. You know what I mean? And that, for me, that was utterly essential to make the Eternals relatable by putting them in... Because I'm not a huge fan of the first Thor movie. Actually, I'm lying. I quite like it. But the best bit is always the breakfast scene. You know what I mean? Because it's fun to see someone different out of context. And the Eternals only become special when we understand what normality is. And rest.
Well, we've got that scene in the trailer for Eternals as well, where they're all just sat around at the end and just...
Oh, yeah, exactly. That's
just shooting the proverbial.
Yeah, no, that's good. I was just thinking about, like, I think what a lot of people feel is the best of the Guardians issues, also on Sell at My Table, is issue 6, which is basically Nova in therapy and then Nova in the bar. And it's there's very little there's like a couple of desultory panels of punching, but most of it is just him talking to people. And I guess, like I said earlier, I always sort of value that over the punching. The punching feels like... I've never been a big fan of professional wrestling. So, you know, it's always about the soap opera for me. It's less about who would win in this fight that the winner has already been decided. It's more about, you know, what did we learn?
I'm more of a fan of action choreography than you are, I think. But like the fact that fight scenes in superhero comics are metaphorical. I mean, fight scenes are really the fundamental magic of superhero comics.
I mean, I try to do good action choreography.
I'm not saying you don't, but like I'm saying like...
Yeah, but I know what you mean.
One micro question?
It's going to have to be a micro question, yes. So I think we'll go for the closest one. Yes. So last question. Make it bloody good. Okay, go for it.
Has there ever been, or like, would there ever be a time where if Marvel came to you and asked you to write a specific character, you'd say no?
That is a good one to finish on.
I don't think I've got a Punisher story in me. I don't think I have got a Punisher story in me. I sort of semi-pitched one once as a sort of more as a kind of idle exercise, and it basically doesn't work. So the only Punisher idea I've ever had doesn't work. Just like at a fundamental level of like working as a story, it doesn't. So I'd say the Punisher. I feel like I'd probably kind of come back with. I don't think I got one in me, and you know.
It's like kind of like putting aside being too busy, which obviously I say no all the time because of that. I would always at least give it a think. Like, you know, I had to be talked into do Young Avengers. Like Young Avengers, I was asked to do, and I always mentioned I'm not sure it's a good idea because like partially because I've done a lot of teen stuff, partially because what I do is so different to what the first run is. But I went away and thought about it and ended up falling in love with it. So you know that's kind of the thing. So I'd at least give it a think. But there's certainly characters like I could imagine coming back and saying, no, that's just, you don't want me writing that. I'll be crap. I'll be no good at it. So yeah, there's that. I can't think of any. I don't think there's any at Marvel I am ethically unable to write. Like at DC, I would never write Watchmen characters. But I can't think of any. Like it's always complicated in comics. But I can't think of any off the top of my head that I would not write because of that.
I'd probably feel slightly iffy about Howard the Duck, but
yeah, actually not Howard.
I don't want to. I mean, the thing is, I've wrote the Defenders so much, and I love writing the Defenders so much that it's kind of like, well, that's really not something that I don't really have a leg to stand on exactly. I wouldn't call it an ethical thing. It's just a weird personal vibe. And also, I don't think I've got a Howard the Duck story. I feel like, you know, lightning would really have to strike me to kind of get a story worthy of Howard the Duck. I don't have it in me. So, you know, there's another one.
I like the fact that the answer is not that you're feeling that the character is beneath you. It's more that you can't reach the pinnacle of what Howard the Duck is.
Oh, no, there's some of that there.
There's some of that. I can imagine.
I mean, one character who I thought I didn't have a story for, who I thought I couldn't write, was The Thing. And it turns out The Thing is really easy and fun to write. So, you know, I'd love to write The Thing again.
The Thing's great. I love The Thing.
Fantastic. So unfortunately our time has run out with these two gentlemen. I am going to point you towards their books they are doing non-Marvel. If you haven't read We Only Find Them When They're Dead, you are seriously missing out because that book is just something special. Die is incredible, and of course Once and Future as well is barreling on through its new arc as well. Do check that out. The books you've got coming out for Marvel, if you could just point them out, or coming up. Obviously Eternals for yourself, Kieron. But yeah. Venom issue 1 is dropping October 27th. I'm co-writing that with the wonderful Ram V, and it's being drawn by Brian Hitch of Ultimates fame. We're having a ton of fun with that. That's a great time. And issue 1 is I think it's gonna blow your mind. So I'm doing a lot of good stuff. Ram and Brian. Good grief. Okay. Yes, it's the traveling Wilburys of comics. And yourself, Kieron, like Eternals?
At the moment, at Marvel, it's just Eternals. So Eternals, we're doing 2 specials at the moment. One came out called Eternals Thanos Rises with me and Dustin Weaver. We've got another one coming out next month, which is called Celestia, I think, which is introducing Ajak and Makari. And then Eternals comes back in November when the movie comes out. I like to think of the movie as just a big advert for our comic, with me and Esad back together and picking off where we left with a load of stuff with Deviants and people yeah, that's it. And more stuff coming soon.
And of course, when Disney Plus does finally option that Dr. Aphra TV series, you'll probably see a tie-in at some point. Please, God.
Oh, Al is on a table. We and Al are on a table, or by each other in the hall. So if anyone got anything else, please come and say.
Yeah,
hi.
no, we'll answer questions at the table. We'll talk. We've got.
You're quite verbose. Yeah,
Yes.
we'll find that.
We
out.
can be.
Ladies and gentlemen, please make your appreciation for Al Ewing and Kieron Gillen.